Hello ladies and gentlemen, this is Mrs. Gallagher, and today we're going to learn about squares and square roots. So when you use a number as a factor 2 times, you are squaring that number or raising it to the second power. And whenever you raise it to the second power, that means your exponent is always going to be equal to 2. So our exponent is always going to be equal to 2 whenever you're raising it to the second power. So an example of that would be, we have something like 4 to the second power. Your exponent right here is 2, and that's saying 4 times 4, and 4 times 4 equals 16. Another example is 7 squared. Okay, we're raising it to the second power. And 7 squared is saying 7 times 7, and 7 times 7 equals 49. So numbers whose square roots are integers or quotients of integers are called perfect squares. So they are called perfect squares. And you have to know what your perfect squares are when we're talking about squares and square roots. So let's look at the table below, and it says, let's list some other perfect squares that you know. Okay, so here's our x value, and we are going to square it, x squared. So for example, we have 1, that's saying 1 squared, which is 1 times 1, and 1 times 1 equals 1. So now we have 2 squared, and 2 squared is 2 times 2, and 2 times 2 equals 4. Then we have 3 squared, which is 3 times 3, and that equals 9. 4 squared, 4 times 4, and that equals 16. 5 squared is 5 times 5. 5 times 5 equals 25. Next is 6 squared. 6 times 6 is 36. 7 squared. 7 times 7 is 49. 8 squared. 8 times 8 is 64. 9 squared. 9 times 9 is 81. And lastly is 10 squared. And 10 times 10 is 100. Okay, so these are some perfect squares you should know. Okay, now let's look at our next table. If you notice here, again, we have x and x squared, but the difference is we have negative numbers here. Okay, so how does that change our answers? So let's look. We have negative 1 squared. Now, if you remember, that means negative 1 times negative 1. And we have a negative and negative, that equals a positive. So a negative 1 times negative 1 equals a positive 1. Let's look at negative 2. Again, negative 2 squared. And that's like saying negative 2 times negative 2. Again, a negative and a negative equals a positive. So your answer is positive 4. So our key concept here is a negative times a negative equals a positive. Okay, so the key concept here is whenever you have a negative and you're timesing it by a negative, it's going to equal a positive. That's what it always is, okay? So our answers are the same when you're multiplying negative numbers. So let's look at 3 squared. If we have negative 3 squared, it's a negative 3 times a negative 3, and that's going to give you a positive 9. We have negative 4 squared. Negative times a negative is a positive, so you positive 16. Negative 5 squared. Negative 5 times negative 5 gives you a positive 25. Negative 6 squared. Negative 6 times negative 6 is a positive 36. Negative 7 squared. Negative 7 times negative 7 is positive 49. Negative 8 squared. Negative 8 times negative 8 is a positive 64. Negative 9 squared. Negative 9 times negative 9 is a positive 81. And then negative 10 squared, negative times a negative, 10 times 10 gives us a positive 100. Okay, so we have the exact same answers as we did in the first chart. So now let's look at the opposite of what a square is. So let's look at the inverse of squaring, which is called a square root. It's called a square root. And another name we can call a square root is a radical. So whenever we see square root or the word radical, it means the exact same thing. So let's look at our table below. And if we look here, we have 3 rows. The first row is the square roots of n. And these are positive square roots we're going to discuss. They're positive. The next row, it says negative square root of n. And these are going to be negative square roots. And then the next one is, it says plus or minus the square root of n. That means either positive and negative both work for this answer. Positive and negative both work for this answer. So let's look at the first column, and we have the square root of 1. And you're going to say to yourself, okay, well, it's the same number of itself. So what times what equals 1? Well, 1. That is your answer. Now we have the square root of 4. So what number times itself equals 4? Well, 2 does, because 2 times 2 equals 4. Next one, square root of 9. Again, you're going to say to yourself, what times what, the same number, equals 9? 3. 3 times 3 equals 9. If you notice here, that's why we filled out the perfect square chart. It makes this chart easier. Next, square root of 16. Okay, so what number times itself equals 16? 4. 4 times 4 equals 16. Next one, the square root of 25. Same thing. Well, what times what equals 25? The same number. It would be 5. Okay, now we have the square root of 36. What number times itself equals 36? 6. 6 times 6 is 36. Next is the square root of 49. What times what equals 49? Same number, 7. 7 times 7 is 49. Now you have the square root of 64. 8 is your answer, because 8 times 8 equals 64. Square root of 81. That's going to give us 9, because 9 times 9 equals 81. And lastly is the square root of 100. And that's going to give us 10, because 10 times 10 equals 100. So let's look at our second row. It says negative square root of n. So all you're doing is putting the negative sign in front of 1. Now, since that negative sign's in front of it, you're just bringing the negative sign down. Negative, and your answer is going to be the same. Negative 1, because 1 times 1 equals 1. So when we have the negative square root of 4, well, what times what equals 4? 2. So your answer is going to be negative 2. Now you have the negative square root of 9. What times 1 equals 9? 3. You have your negative in front, so it's going to be negative 3. Next, the negative square root of 16. Again, bring your negative down, and it's going to be negative 4. All right, so this is the pattern we're doing. So you have negative square root of 25. That's going to give you a negative 5. Square root, or negative square root of 36 is negative 6. Negative square root of 49 is negative 7. Negative square root of 64, negative 8. Negative square root of 81, negative 9. And then negative square root of 100 is negative 10. Now our last row here, it says plus or minus the square root of n. That means both the positive answer and the negative answer works, because a negative times a negative equals a positive. So when you're doing these kind of problems, you're just going to add the positive and the negative symbol of the square root of 1. So when your answer would be a positive and a negative 1. That would be your answer. So when we have this positive or negative square root of 4, you're going to bring down your positive and negative symbol. And what times what equals 4? 2. Next, you have the positive and negative square root of 9. Again, you're bringing down the positive and negative symbol, because that means both answers work. And that's going to give you 3, because 3 times 3 equals 9. Now we have positive square root, or positive and negative square root of 16. What times what equals 16? We said that already, 4. So you're positive and negative 4. We have the positive and negative square root of 25. So they give you the positive and negative 5 as your answer. Positive and negative square roots of 36 gives you positive and negative 6. Positive and negative square root of 49 is plus or minus 7. Positive and negative square root of 64 gives us 8, plus or minus 8. Positive and negative square root of 81 gives us plus or minus 9. Or positive and negative 9, either or. And the positive square root of 100 gives us positive and negative 10. So let's look at one more key concept when dealing with square roots. The square root of a negative number. So the square root of a negative number is not possible. So whenever you have a negative inside of the square root, inside, it is not possible. You can't do it. So let's look at number 1. The square root of negative 64. Your answer is not possible. It's not possible. Number 2, the square root of negative 36. Again, is not possible. Not possible. And then number 3, the square root of negative 121, again, is not possible. So what I want you to think about, and we'll discuss this more in class, is why is it not possible? Why is this not possible? And we'll discuss that in class. So why do you think the answer is not possible? Okay, let's do some examples together. Okay, let's do directions. Examples, evaluate the following square roots or radicals. So number 1, square root of 64. What times what equals 64? And that would be 8. 8 times 8 is 64, and that is your answer. Number 2, negative square root of 36. So here the negative is outside of the radical. Therefore, you bring the negative down. And what times what equals 36? That's the same number, 6. So your answer is negative 6. Number 3, the square root of negative 81. Okay, well in this problem, the negative is inside. So when it's inside, your answer is going to be not possible. Number 4, the square root of 144. Okay, so what times what equals 144? That's going to give you 12. So 12 is your answer. Number 5, positive or negative square root of 0.0009. Okay, so again, you're going to bring down the plus or minus. And what times what equals 0.0009? Now this one, think about 9, and what times what equals 9? It's 3. And you're going to get rid of 2 zeros here. So your answer is 0.03. And then lastly, you have negative square root of 81 over 100. Now when you have something like this, I want you to break it up. What I mean by breaking it up is you're going to put negative square root of 81 on top. And then we're going to put square root of 100 on the bottom. And then your next step is, okay, so we have our negative in front. And the square root of 81 is 9. So 9 is on the numerator. And the square root of 100 is 10. So your answer is negative 9/10. That's it. So what I'd like you to do is you try section. I'd like you to do numbers 1 through 6, and we will discuss them in class. Thank you.